This episode of Love Larn is sponsored by Scott Bonnar Fabrication and Parts. I've got my two roller halves all ready to go. The ratchet box is reassembled with the little PVC sheaths in there as well. 3 bolts connecting everything together. Same on this side, except this side's also got the counterweight down there for this 14-inch machine. The counterweight's not going to be present on the 17-inch. It's present for the 14s and the 20s. And there's maybe a difference of opinion or some mythology, I guess, that would suggest that the counterweight belongs on the side of the roller assembly opposite the engine to counterbalance the weight of the engine. That's not the case. The counterweight belongs on the same side as the engine, so opposite the drive chains, to assist with turning and steerability, I guess. At the end of the day, it's up to you. Do your own research, but what I'm going to do is install my counterweight under the engine. So in other words, it's going to be sitting this roller half with the counterweights going on this side of the shaft, and this being the chain side is going through the other roller half. In terms of lubrication, these shafts have been around for a very, very long time. There's no grease required for the little pawl holders because you want the pawls to operate freely within them. You don't want any grease or muck or oil constraining the function of those. So I've painted this, but it's going to go in grease free. A little bit of oil on the shaft might not be a terrible idea. Just wiped on with a bit of a rag, and for that purpose I'm just going to use my 3-in-1 just multi-purpose oil on a rag here, a paper towel. Just going to do one side at a time. Just wipe it on lightly. The approach I'm going to take here, I've got my bolt on the end just to help hold everything together. I'm going to take my 3 pawls for this side. There's a little dimple in each pawl, and that faces into the pawl holder like so. So if the dimple's facing out, it's backwards. So I'll pop all 3 of those into place. Just tuck them in so they're not in the way too much. And what I'm going to try and do is get everything back together without the whole contraption falling apart, and without losing any pawls along the way. So you can do this standing up if you want to. There we go. So that's oh, not quite, almost seated. There we go. And so to keep that there, we have the little clamps. Now these aren't set up yet. I've got a screw that goes in there and a new bolt that will feed into there. We'll just put it in loosely for now because we don't want it protruding through the end at all, because it will interfere with our with the shaft, and that's going to pop on there like that. You can see down here there's a little flat spot on this shaft, and that's how we locate this collar, so that the end of this bolt is going to bear against that flat spot. This bolt is the original, but the nut's new. I believe the nut is stainless as well, so I don't want any incompatibilities with the metals here. So I'm just putting on some of my moly grease on these threads so that nut doesn't end up seizing up against that thread. So I'm not going to wind this in all the way, just enough to keep it in place. Make a mess of everything, of course. I'll put a little bit of grease on the inside of this collar as well, just to help it slide home. And then we'll line those up approximately. Keep everything in place. And then we can give it a give it a bit of a tap to get it all the way home. I've just got my little persuader block here and a hammer. Just going to give those a few, just give that a few taps on either edge. That pawl holder is cast and whatnot, so we just want to be careful with everything so we don't crack anything. I find a little 8mm open-ended spanner works well on these square-headed bolts. It's not perfect, obviously, but it does the job fairly effectively. I think the trick is immobilizing the shaft while you're, bearing down on it to tighten this. I've got it with one hand back here, just turning in the opposite direction to how I'm trying to tighten with the spanner. So I've just got that loosely tightened for now. I'll bring the little locknut up to the face of the collar as well, just temporarily. And we'll come back and tighten that off once the other half of the roller's on. If you can hear that, I'm just trying to push the shaft backwards and forwards inside of the drum here. There's a little bit of play here, which I think is probably acceptable. It might not be to you, but the main thing I'm going to be looking for is, once I've got the other half of the rear roller on here, is the gap between the two halves. Obviously these two halves are split for a reason, because they need to be able to work independently, so you need a little bit of a gap there, but not too much, of course, either. And it's quite possible that we can get a bit more, get this on here, just a tiny extra little fraction, but we'll play with that once we've got the other half on. Got a couple of blocks here, just going to lay them down like that, so that the other end of the shaft can just sit down between those two blocks. And you can see there's just a tiny little bit of movement there, but the operation of the shaft and the pawls is what we want. So when I turn it that way, the pawls are locking up. When I turn it this way, everything's spinning freely, which is what we want. So we're ready to just oil up this side of the shaft now. Just give it a light coating again. Whether it's going to do anything over the next, 40 years is up for debate. Probably not a lot. Pawls in. I've got 3 more pawls for this side, with the divot facing inwards to the pawl holder. And then it's just a simple matter of getting our much lighter roller half and feeding it down over the shaft, just like so. You can see the gap there is minimal, which is what we want. Get a bit of grease again just on the inside of this clamp. Just looking down this shaft, there's another flat spot where this bolt is going to bear against, so I'm going to line up and feed it on down there, hopefully. There we go. Needed to think about it for a second there. And give it a little whack to help it go home, hopefully. There we go. Just tighten up our little square-headed bolt with the 8mm open spanner again as much as we can. It's a little bit harder to hold everything in place now, but we can use the weight of the roller halves and the operation of the pawls, maybe, if you're lucky, I guess, to help you out. What I'm doing here, I'm just sort of got it twisted around here. I'm sort of bearing off the face of the roller half just to try and get it nice and snug. So a little bit of play here. That gap, just looking through here, is maybe a mil. And if I lift it up, it's sort of 1.5 mils. So you know, the variation there is probably about right. Give this thing another few whacks. And it's still about the same really by the sounds of it. So tighten that off. Do up the little lock nut on the top, and I'll get a wrench for that one and lock it down I think as well. And I've got a 1/2 inch spanner just to tighten it up. So that side's locked down tight now. I'm going to flip things over, loosen off that bolt, and just make sure that we've got as much play as possible removed from this assembly, because now is the time to do it. So that's, as it stands, our gap between these two roller halves. If I squish things together, it changes marginally. To be honest, I'd probably attribute that mainly to a little bit of play and wear perhaps within the bushings that the shaft passes through, rather than being the collars being locked down tightly enough.